We're really grateful for your attention and your time on Ukraine, especially going into the third year of the war, when we're very acutely aware that it doesn't have the same media attention, at least in some places, as it did in 2022. So welcome back, everyone. This is our webinar series on civil society and Ukrainian resilience. This is year two of our webinar. We started this exactly a year ago, so it's our year anniversary. We've planned a slate of 9 events for this fall, and although we haven't announced specific names of guests and speakers, we're really excited about the potential list of people that will be joining us. And we're grateful and appreciative to have your attention as well for what we think is just such an important topic and such an inspiring topic as well. This is a webinar, just a reminder, so you can use the Q&A function to ask questions and offer comments. That's the best way to communicate with us during the webinar. We're sponsored by Ponars Eurasia, which is at the George Washington University, also by ISAR Ednannia, which is especially useful in helping us to post the recordings of these. So a huge thank you to Olga Nikolska and ISAR Ednannia for that. And the University of Colorado Boulder, which provides the webinar platform on which we're hosting this. We're also grateful to have you today because today we decided that a good way to kickstart this in the second year was to interview ourselves and to start with the Ukrainians that we've had with us for the past 2 years who have been helping us organize this and talk about their experiences and the amazing work that's going on. So we'll jump right in because we're now 2 minutes past the hour with Jeff and I will be interviewing Roman Oleksenko and Olga Nikolska to begin with, and then they may ask us some questions as well. We are hoping that this is a really interactive webinar today. I know the webinar format can be a bit impersonal because we can't see your faces, you can't see each other's faces, but we do hope that you'll actively use the Q&A to make comments, offer suggestions, ask questions, and really we'd like to hear from you and what your perspectives are on all of this. So I'll turn it over to Geoffrey Glenn, if that's all right, to start us with the first questions for Roman and Olga.
So welcome, everybody. Thanks for tuning in. Appreciate you rejoining us. We've had some really high level of positive feedback from the series. So I'm just going to kind of kick it off with Olga. I kind of wanted you to reflect on your work with the Ednania, talk about kind of what that looks like, and maybe if you could give us a little bit of feedback about what's kind of changed, because you have been there before the full-scale invasion and since, and that probably has meant a lot of differences in your work. So,
yeah, thank you so much, Jeff. I think it's very important to first of all say that we really do appreciate everything that everyone is doing for Ukraine. Because without support of our partners, both within Ukraine and overseas and in Europe, it won't be possible to hold on for so long. So yeah, this is the huge thank you to everyone who supports Ukraine in these challenging times. I wanted to underline or stress the fact that local Ukrainian organizations were able to respond immediately when the full-scale invasion started. For example, ISAR Ednania repurposed and started to give out grants on the 26th of February, which was the third day of war, and we didn't stop ever since. We are working with the support of our big international partners, such as USAID, the EU delegation, UNICEF, and others. But surprisingly, due to our reputation, maybe, we also raised almost $600,000 from private foundations and private donors, which we never did before. Like, we always relied on big international partners, and it was a huge surprise. And we are distributing these funds to rebuild and strengthen our communities of Ukraine that are suffering from full-scale invasion, from influx of IDPs, internally displaced people, and so on. So yeah, it was kind of a 3-year marathon, I would say, because we realize the need, we know the need, we research the need, and we are acting accordingly. And I think it's the best way to give local organizations the possibility to do so, because sometimes those coming from other countries, they have their own vision and don't fully realize the context. But those who are working on the ground, they are always empowered with local knowledge, you know. So yeah, that's kind of it.
I'd like to follow up and steal something out of Ramon's playbook from our past season, and that's it. How are you dealing with this on a personal level? Like, what's life like for you um, since a full-scale invasion, or since 2014? However you want to reflect on that.
That a question to Olga?
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Okay. I'll leave it there. Thank you. So yeah. Olga, could you hear me or?
Yes, I could. So okay, let's maybe give the floor to Roman. I don't want to steal all the highlights, you know. I know it's kind of a Vanity Fair here, but maybe Roman would like to answer first.
You didn't steal anything, and you'll get a pass because you're not wearing black today. I don't know if that's the time to announce our unofficial name of our group of organizers, and just starting a little humorous notes, um, because of our names, Jeff, Ramon, Olha, and Sarah, we came up with a name with the acronym GROSS, and I'm not seeing you wearing black, Holga, so. I guess you're taking the lead. You're up on the stage, up in front. It's really hard to see people not laughing at this joke, this silly joke. So
It's
I
a
guess the
good
question,
joke. It's good.
at least you're laughing. Okay. Um, I think we started off with a script of some of the questions, so Olga and I can talk a little bit about what we do and how our lives have changed, specifically when we talk about our organizations, and then I will finish off with the questions that Jeff posed. So, as many of you know, I'm still with the Peace Corps. Uh, uh, we don't have any Peace Corps volunteers in country, as you know, first because of COVID, now because of the full-scale invasion. But we do have a very robust virtual service pilot program. Still the largest program in the world. I think as of today, we have close to 60, I think 58 to be precise, virtual service participants supporting Ukraine. And I would say as the time goes by, the number of American private citizens who've joined this program has shifted from mostly Ukraine RPCVs, meaning like return Peace Corps volunteers, to people who have never served in the Peace Corps, like applying to serve in Ukraine through the virtual service pilot program. And actually, I see some of them on this call right now, and I want to just recognize them for finding the time and joining. And they just started like a couple of weeks ago, and I see a great pool of professionals who care about what's happening in Ukraine and who care to set aside some time and share their experience with their Ukrainian counterparts, not really knowing, the cultural background, not really knowing the people who have never traveled to Ukraine. I want to just applaud these individuals, all of them on the call, including a lot of volunteers foreign volunteers who've moved to Ukraine or have been coming back to Ukraine, since over the past 2.5 years. So there's some great success stories that Peace Corps can talk about, can share with you all, uh, going back like 2 years ago. And actually, Jeff is one of them. I mean, Geoff Glenn, he started off like a 3 months gig. It was 3 months. I think it was 3 months initially, like a year ago. And he's still supporting ISAR Ednannia. And that, to me, that's kind of like this an example of a success story of a person who cares about Ukraine and the events in Ukraine. And if I may, I know, Jeff, you asked a question, and I'd rather that Olga answer the question, but I want to kind of put it on hold right now and transfer it over to Sarah, building off of caring about Ukraine. Sarah, why do you care about Ukraine? You have never been to Ukraine, as far as I know.
Once, very briefly.
Once, yes,
Yeah.
correct, yes.
Yeah.
I should have known. But why do you care to stay engaged, to pay attention, and to? I know a little bit about you personally, like your professional story, but I want our audience to actually hear your come to Jesus moment when it comes to Ukraine.
I don't know if I can make it as good as a come to Jesus moment, but it's the most important thing to me in the world right now that's happening so politically and in the world. And for a long time, my research was on, I would have said post-communist, the post-Soviet region, with just a primary focus on Russia. I mean, that was really my main area of interest. I was affiliated with the Higher School of Economics in Moscow. I started going to Russia in 2002. I went every year or more often and had extended periods there through 2019. And then the pandemic hit, and then the full-scale invasion happened. And it never occurred to me to stop going to Russia until the full-scale invasion happened, at which point, I mean, I can't really anyways at this point. So it's kind of like it's not a decision so much, but like I wouldn't anyways at this point. But I also like it's not possible. But after the full-scale invasion, that was a wake-up call for me to like, this is such an awful thing happening. And how did we get to this point? And many people did not anticipate the full-scale invasion happening. Some people did. There are some very notable exceptions, especially of Ukrainians saying that this was going to happen, that this was always a risk. But many people didn't. And it was a wake-up call for the area of the world that I study, and that collectively we got something wrong, but that I was not understanding correctly either what was going on, or the importance of understanding Ukrainian politics in its own right. And not really, I mean, people have talked for a long time about decentering and decolonizing the study of the region. And I knew about that, and I didn't necessarily disagree with it, but I wasn't really paying attention to it. It was just sort of like, oh, there's these people that care about other countries. And I wasn't opposed to that in any way. I didn't think that was wrong, but it wasn't what I was interested in. So I had a very myopic view before. Um, and then in the past 2 years, I've just been tremendously inspired working with Ukrainians. I mean, it has been it's odd to say that it's been a joy to do it in the midst of such awful circumstances, really. Like, I don't know that that's the right way to put it or exactly what I mean, but it's been a silver lining to it, and it's been enormously inspiring to do that, and to work with people in Ukraine, and to start to realize what I didn't know, and what I was not really appreciating as understanding that before what I had was a very Russia-centric approach. Um, Even as somebody coming from, I mean, I'm not Russian. I don't, my family doesn't come from Russia. Um, I speak Russian because I spent years going and studying it. But even as someone not coming from Russia, that my view had been very, very filtered through a Russian-centric lens. So I have to thank Roman and Olga and Jeff for who played a big, big part in that. So.
Yeah. Well, and I just to kind of like to support what Sarah just said, um, aside from my gross joke about us being the band called Gross, we keep each other awake at night. Oftentimes on the Ukrainian side because of the air raid sirens, and they need to seek shelter or whatever. But because of the time difference as well, and we've become, I don't know, maybe a family, sort of like more than a band, maybe less than a family yet, but we're moving to that direction. A virtual family. I have to be very clear, and we're representing the Peace Corps. Yeah, we've become friends, really good friends, and supporting each other, not just via this, a weekly, series, but also in various other shapes and forms, like, various other initiatives, advice, communication, participating in various other virtual events with various audiences. So to me, that has been a gift that I'm really grateful to each and every one of you. But I guess the same question would be for Jeff too. Like, why do you care about Ukraine? You have your own long story with Ukraine, but I want the audience to really hear it.
Well, I don't want to be too long. Thank you, and I appreciate everything that all of you said. I, the short answer is I became an empty nester, sent my youngest daughter off to college, went to um, a kind of an introduction to pursuing my PhD. And while the person was up at the podium talking about what I could do at the Evans School, they mentioned that I could also make a part of that study Peace Corps service. And as a 50-something person, I went, when I was 20, that sounded romantic. And then I went home and thought about it and thought, I probably need the Peace Corps service more than I need the PhD, because I've spent a long time in my life going to school. And so I joined, and I was at a retreat in silence, and I got an email that said they'd like to schedule a call, and it happened to be at the same time my retreat was over. So I got up at 4 o'clock in the morning and had a great interview on a phone call with a lady. And by the end of it, she said something about Ukraine. And I had a friend who had been here prior to my dawn. And she said, would you be interested in that? I said, yeah, wherever you want to send me, because that's probably where I need to go. And a few months later, I had gone through all the rigors of joining the Peace Corps and was on my way to Florida to be sent off, kind of not knowing what I would find. I completed my training in Chernihiv, which is kind of, if anybody knows what's been happening, is one of the first areas that was under attack and outside of Kiev, and then ended up being sent to Dubno. And when we arrived at that time in Peace Corps, you didn't know who your partner was going to be. So they had this big huge event where they announced your partners, and people were gathered, and there were it just seemed like thousands of people, but hundreds of people in this big room. And it was strange because I walked in and I looked across, not knowing who my partner would be, and I saw a guy standing in the corner, and I knew for a fact that that was the guy I was meant to know. And he's turned out to be one of my best friends. And so, I finished my service in 2018, but my service didn't end there with Ukraine. My connection to Ukraine only started there. Mykola thereafter formed a charitable foundation, which I am very much affiliated with, and we stayed connected. And he's literally one of the best people I've ever met in my life, and one of the sweetest and most committed guys. And simultaneous to that, after I left Peace Corps, I kind of reunited with somebody I had met, and I ended up falling in love with her and marrying her a year later. And we hunkered down during the pandemic. We were in the United States at that time, and when had a chance to kind of be with family there, as I have a large family, 5 kids, 4 grandkids. So anyway, we were in a position when it started looking like the invasion was going to happen, when there were soldiers amassing on the borders. We were watching everything because my stepson, Mila's son, is of military service age, and Mykola is here, and Roman, and people that I stayed in contact with and know. And after the full-scale invasion, we had the opportunity, because we didn't have a lot going on, to just kind of leave our positions and stay online and in our respective work. And we traveled to Poland, and we were there trying to help people who wanted to cross over. And some of our family wanted to stay in Ukraine, and obviously Vola couldn't leave. So after about a month and a half of trying to figure that out, we decided, maybe the best thing was to return. And we've basically been here ever since June of 2022. And you know, what I knew before has served me a lot. The connections I made, Ramon, in this arc, I met Olga and Sarah, and like thousands of people have been part of this whole trajectory. It's not like three or four people have become instrumental in my life, and people come and go, and there's kind of intersections with people, and you try and kind of help out. But you know, I can say that now you guys are my family. You know, I mean, I don't need them. You know, and my band members. I don't know which one. Maybe I'm the drummer who gets left out or whatever. But you know, I'm not. We haven't quite just figured that out. We play a bunch of different instruments, so you know, we switch it up. But oh, and by the way, we are going to come out with a T-shirt for fundraising, so you can become part of the Gross fan club. But the you know the long and short of it is, you know, a lot of people have come and gone in this, and new people are arriving, as Ramon pointed out, and you know, but the network is growing. You know, the people who are on this call showing up, the people that I'm working with. Finally, some people have sat back and thought about how they make this a systemic, like how they create a system of support versus just a reactionary, which was amazing. The reaction by the global community, the flags flying, the money being donated in the first few months is just absolutely amazing, and it should be donated. And for those of you on this call, you already know this is not a small thing that's happening here. This is a global, world changing event that will shape the future history of our planet. And it's not and it also demands our attention and our support and our humanitarian efforts and so on. So sorry to soapbox, but so turning it back over, around Robin, because I think you know, Ramon stumbled on something during last season, which is there is a personal relationship to this experience, whether you're living here or not. And it's kind of good to just get a quick check-in, like, you know, what is this like for you in terms of your daily existence, in terms of your state of being. So come back to Olga with that question. She doesn't mind
I'll
answering
tack
it.
on to that too, because we have a question from Barbara Leopold about what keeps you going. I think for both,
Oh,
for
thanks.
Olga, it was directed at Olga, but for Roman too, like kind of what keeps you going, because and you know, Jeff, you're living in Ukraine as well. I'm not, and so I feel this odd disconnect from sort of what my daily life looks like, but and what I know is happening. But what keeps you going? I'll tack that on there.
Thank you, Barbara. It's great to have you here. One wise man, our partner in the US from Berks County Community Foundation, he told me that you should first take care of yourself in order to be able to take care of others. So keeping to some daily rituals, going to gym in the evenings and so on, this is what keeps me going. I'm taking care of myself. And I would really appreciate if every Ukrainian volunteer and member of NGOs and charitable foundations remembered that rule, because burnout is a real thing. And it happens that we didn't believe that it existed until it hit, you know. So it's crucially important to take care of yourself first, and then you can help others. And it's the only way, because otherwise you just fall into a deep depression. You don't have any strength to move on and go on. And yeah, this is what keeps me personally going. I'm taking some time to take care of myself in order to be able to go on. Roman, I think Jeff wanted you to.
Yeah, I guess I've been trying to avoid that answering that question. No, that's not the case. I think I think what keeps me going is the realization that if I'm not doing anything or enough, in my opinion, I will just be freaking out. I'll be super anxious and depressed. Um, so what we are doing with this group, with this audience, is something that is very close to my heart, because I think I'm more or less good with like public diplomacy, and maybe if I can convince someone, or not convince, but at least if I can help someone look at Ukraine and at the ongoing war from a different perspective, I think I would consider this mission accomplished. And it's so much easier to do with such great team members as you'll see on the screen. So yeah, keeping busy in order to stay sane. Um, I also try to do like physical work, meaning not going to the gym, but sort of going to the gym, but assisting with the delivery of humanitarian supplies and aid to Ukraine through the initiative called Ukrainian Action, which is nonprofit founded by a former Peace Corps volunteer and a dear friend of mine. And since day one, basically, I was following the full-scale invasion. So whenever I have free time on the weekends, usually, or if I take a break, um, I we I have we build a team in Ukraine. And when I say team, I mean close to 30 people that is engaged in receiving requests, processing requests, uh, and bringing in humanitarian aid uh, from all of the supporters, including many of those who are on the call right now. And I want to thank, even though I'm not seeing your beautiful faces, I want to thank each and every one of you for supporting Ukraine in various ways. So that's what brings meaning to my life, and I am determined to keep it going as much as I can and as far as I can, even though I'm exhausted at the end of the day, just like all of us. But feeling exhausted is good because I know that our defenders have it much worse. And so while it's still there, because life can change tomorrow for me personally and for everybody here, um, I'm willing to make the most of that day. And this is something that a lot of Ukrainians have learned to appreciate. Carpe diem, just seize the day and make the most of that day while you still can. And
On that note, I think it's good to point out that someone was mentioning a highlight from the past series and mentioning your son joining when Nazar joined us to talk about the war from a teenage perspective. So, yeah, which was a remarkable session. We had two young people, and it was so generous of Nazar to join us and to do that because, I mean, to be that age in Ukraine and watching this happen, I mean, I really can't fully imagine the impact that has on the course of a person's life.
Yeah, absolutely. And thanks for bringing up Nazar. Nazar is my older son. And we had a session with him and this other teenager by the name of Roxolana. No, Romana, who was the graduate of Ukrainian Leadership Academy, if I'm correct. Um, and kind of because before we got together today, we created like a list of prop questions that we should kind of look at if we want to make this conversation sort of meaningful, but also celebratory, right? Because it's our anniversary. It's 1 year anniversary. And one of the questions was, what are your top 3 sessions? Speaking of the 2 seasons, and if you don't mind, I'll start very quickly. So my favorite one, the top 3 sessions that I think are unique, are the first session that we had with Ambassador Herbst, because it was our first session, and I think it was a different format at the time, and we're still learning to, how we can do that. I was super nervous at the time, and I remember Sarah actually almost like punishing me from asking like a follow-up question, trying to restrain me from unleashing my.
I don't remember that.
I do remember that.
I don't,
There was a question about victory, like, because he kind of avoided answering my question, like, how do you see Ukraine's victory? Because the United States says, well, we'll stand with you as long as we can, as we can. But then he never really answered the question about what does it take and how long and what is the end
yeah,
result. And so I
yeah.
wanted a follow-up question, and you kind of like, well, Mom, maybe we can ask other people their question. Like, no. And thank you for letting me follow through with my question. So that was my like number 1 session. The second session was with my son and Romana. Again, hearing from teenage perspective was great, but also like I like the vibe that they brought into that session. Jeff was facilitating that conversation, and I think he ran out of questions really fast because those teenagers, like they were super politicians, in the sense that they stuck to the question and answered the question, but then they answered the question. I mean,
They hadn't learned yet
by
that
the
you can
book.
just say whatever you want. You don't have to answer the
Exactly.
question. Yeah,
Exactly.
they hadn't learned that deception.
And
Yeah.
some of the questions left me speechless. Like when Nazar said something that I don't want to repeat here, like my jaw dropped wide open. I'm like, whoa, you can say that and get away with it. But that, that was a lot of people laughed, and so did I. So that was the second session that was really special to me. And the third one, I think the third one is, at least right now, what's happening right now is really special to me, because it's been 1 year. We failed to engage any other motivational speakers for tonight's session. So we decided, hey, why not do it ourselves?
You're not supposed to admit that. This was planned all along. This was entirely
I don't know
intentional.
what you're talking about. No, but this is like we wanted to just full disclosure, and I'm not gonna reveal any names, but we try to get a hold of someone who's like really cool, and we're still trying, right? But then at one point we said like, wow, it's really hard to get a hold of that person. Why don't we do this, what we're doing right now? And I think all of us like that idea, and just the fact that we have so many people on this call. Means a lot to me. I mean, people care to hear what we have to say, not just the people that we see as sort of like, motivational speakers or public figures or whatever. So those were my top three. I don't know who has not gone for a long time.
We also do have some questions in the chat too, which are, so Raman from Catherine Anadu has just sort of, how are the Peace Corps staff, or former staff rather, doing? So I'll let you, you can jump in with that, or we can mix it
Yeah, I'll just
around.
answer it. Thank you, Catherine. So the staff is doing fine. There are only 14 of us. 2/3 have been reduced earlier this year, but we've kept like what we call the most critical staff, just to keep the virtual service pilot program going. Obviously, we were sad to see so many talented individuals go, but we're happy that most of them, if not all of them, have found employment, which is pretty good. And then a lot of them that I run into occasionally, they say how much they appreciated working for the Peace Corps, and how much they missed those times working for the Peace Corps, and how impactful that work was regarding of the difficulties that we all experienced at the time. So thank you for caring about the Peace Corps and asking that question.
I just wanted to say hi to Catherine. Catherine was a Peace Corps volunteer in Vinnytsia, in one of the community foundations that I'm kind of supervising. So hi, Catherine. It's a pleasure having you here.
I can answer the next question. We have a question from Marta Schiffer. And thank you to all of you for being willing to use the Q&A function. I know it's a little bit impersonal. I've been reposting it in the chat. We have had big discussions about whether or not to keep the webinar format versus going to a Zoom meeting. For now, we've decided to stay with the webinar format, but we want it to be as engaging and interactive as possible. So keep putting your questions in the Q&A and your comments. We love it. So Marta Schiffer asks how we can have more global citizens have a come to Jesus realization about the Russia-Ukraine relations amidst the exhaustive disinformation campaign the world is experiencing. I appreciate this question a lot. I don't know. It's a tough battle. Because I think there are big blind spots, even for people that I wouldn't have expected there to be blind spots about that issue. And I don't, it's hard for me to answer this because I have to talk about people that I've worked with for 20 years, studying the region. And they're not people that I think are bad people. I don't dislike them, but I've come to think that there's some big blind spots, that they're wrong about some things. And it is interesting to go through to see what people's differing reactions are to a crisis and to war, and to see when people don't pivot and when people don't change what they're doing. At one point, I had a conversation with someone who was an academic, and I said, "Oh, well, what are you doing to pivot your research? Like, how are you adjusting to this?" And they said, "Nothing. I'm not doing anything differently." And it was like, really? Nothing? There's not even a pause there for like a maybe. And so I don't know. I mean, I will put in the chat, I recently wrote a piece for an academic organization. It's like a newsletter piece about keeping the focus on Ukraine and really trying to more fundamentally shift our study of the region. And I'm using the term region intentionally as a generic term because I don't know what the good term to use is. It used to be we always said post-Soviet, and that's not ideal in a lot of ways. Ukraine really is a European country. It's not Eurasian. It's not like we don't want to just refer to it as post-Soviet. It is a term of convenience and that people know what it means. And certainly the Soviet legacy is a big part of what's going on. But so I'll put that link here in the chat. I mean, I don't intend to sort of go back to Russia in like a professional sense. I mean, anytime soon. It's very odd to me to think about just not doing something that I did for really, I mean, about 20 years, because I started going in 2022 or 2002. 2002, I started going when I was an undergrad and I studied abroad. Because I'm a person that just sticks with things. I keep doing the same thing. If it's what I'm interested in and like I don't drop people, I don't drop projects, I don't drop and so it's very odd for me to pivot that sharply. So I don't know what the answer is the real answer, but I'll keep up the fight as best I can. Yeah, and it's nice to have people like you asking that question that care about, I think, making that happen. For Olga and Roman, and perhaps for Olga first, I'm curious though to ask you, what do you think is still what's the biggest misperception about Ukraine still? Or and I mean, like, Olga, I'm thinking of you because like you work with lots of international organizations, you travel a lot, you work with international donors, like funneling grant money and different things. Like, what are they getting wrong? Like the grant organizations or the foreign community in general? Like, and maybe I don't know if you can say fully unfiltered what your donors you work with are getting wrong, but what are we still getting wrong?
Thank you for this question, Sarah. The first thing that came to my mind, like the misperception about Ukraine, is saying that we are like fascist, Nazi, and whatever not state. We're not. We are welcoming each and every nationality that wants to reside in Ukraine. We always lived together with Crimean Tatars, with Greek population, with even Koreans in some regions, like Korean diasporas or however they call communities, and we didn't have problems. All the nationalistic things and movements were Russia instigated, like since the old times, since, I don't know, 17th, 18th century, everything that happened here was not happening because Ukrainians were Nazis or fascists or nationalistic or whatever. I think we always welcomed like everyone, just those who want and like to work and to achieve something and go forward together. So this is the first thing that came to my mind, and I think it's like the biggest Russian inspired propagandist thing that somehow resides in the minds of people. On the side of civil society, as I'm working in this sphere for over 20 years already, I'd like to say that I think that international donors and donor community are mistaking in what civil society of Ukraine is capable of, you know. Sometimes I think that Ukrainian civil society can teach developed countries how to do things because we are so creative. And if speaking about fundraising practices that developed over the past almost 3 years, they are doing something unbelievable. It's constantly growing. It has huge numbers of organizations, and I don't know if I can say that, but with the full-scale invasion, the best thing that happened to Ukrainian civil society is that people with business-like or business mindset came into the sector, bringing a lot of things like agile and so on into civil society operations, which makes it even stronger, because usually it's like learning on the go, you know? Oh, what is I don't know what is project management. We just like wanted to build a kids playground in our community, and we just did it. We didn't know that we needed project management for that. ISAR Ednania has been developing capacities of civil society organizations for like the whole time of its existence. And I'm proud to say that we taught Ukrainian smaller organizations how to develop, how to use the tools that the sector is offering, how to learn from those who are stronger to become even stronger in return, you know? So yeah, these are like two main misperceptions that I wanted to mention about Ukraine.
Well, we have dead air, so
If
we do have
I,
another question in the chat, but I think it's a good question, maybe for Roman and Jeff and Olga, about research and academics and the types of topics you would suggest pivoting to best help Ukraine. I mean, I think civil society, based on Olga's answer, I wholeheartedly agree that I think other countries have something to learn from the remarkable civil society organization in Ukraine, which predates the full-scale invasion. I mean, the reason it's so effective now is there's a long legacy of it being active and organized and working with partners and embracing diversity. Yeah, but what do you all think? Like, so civil society, but what should we be studying?
Roman, you want to take that?
um, I'll take a jab, I guess. I mean, I think critical thinking would be critical thinking and media literacy. And I'm only saying this because I thought the Ukrainians were far behind the rest of the world when it came to critical thinking and media literacy. But observing what's happening in the United States um, makes me really depressed because for many years we've been told that Americans do a much better job at critical thinking and media literacy. I'm not so convinced anymore. So I think before you study any topic, and my top topic would be history, because a lot of people have forget history, and as a result, history tends to come back and bite you in the back. Um, but then before you do so, you have to exercise some personal hygiene and do some good thinking, critical thinking, um, and exercise media literacy. That would be my recommendations. So basically, before you want to help Ukraine, you can help your country, but at the same time help Ukraine.
I'd like to comment. And part of one of the things that I'm very passionate about doing here is about youth civic engagement and education, and not just about talking heads and theoretical engagement. We're talking about, and I think Olha's exactly right. Right, when you see what civil society organizations are doing in Ukraine, and you realize that it's practical skill sets, and there's a value in developing a skill and then educating yourself around it, but it doesn't necessarily mean that you have to be educated before you can develop a skill. And I think that that's one thing that I'm seeing is a big gap in what I perceive in the US and in some other Western countries. And looking at the US from 9,000 kilometers away is a whole different experience than standing in the middle of it. And I think that there's a sense of unwillingness to learn because there's a sense of elitism in academia and in just kind of the general population, that because you happen to be an American, you have some kind of greater gift and greater insight and greater position of privilege that you can look down kind of at the world with, right? And you think that when a country is invaded, or you think that, and I'm speaking from my own experience, my past, you think that something's happening in the kind of global sphere outside of the US, that it's somehow a result of not having certain skill sets or not having the right kind of work hard attitude or whatever that happens to be. And so, my thing to most academics, and it kind of harkens back to what Sarah said, is that I think it's time to kind of like, if you're going to make a difference in whatever way you want to, whether it be in academia in the US or globally or whatever, that you sit back and you actually take a good hard look at your own predispositions, and then maybe think about what academia is actually supposed to do, which is empower other people to be better thinkers, better, have a better understanding of the systems that they're negotiating with, instead of just acting like you can give a commentary from the sidelines. And I really admire a lot of the people I'm dealing with. Harvard is running a leadership program for sustainable development in Ukraine. MIT, there's a whole group of people who have been contributing to doing like environmental studies in Ukraine, right? From using the latest technology in labs and tools. I could go on and on and on about the people that I'm coming in contact. But why are they doing that? Because there's a reason to use that educational and technological forum for benefiting other people in a practical way, and so I coming back to the question, I just say, one of the things that we can do is we can educate our kids, and we can keep investing in practical know-how wherever we are in the world, so that our kids are better informed, because in 10 years they're going to be the ones who are voting, donating, working, right? And while I think that that's a responsibility of parents, when you unempower parents and you marginalize parents, then you marginalize their kids. And so maybe that's something that we need to look at. And the last thing I'll say about this is, if you understand your history, and there's lots of arguments about it, but there's probably more comparison between what's happening in Ukraine in some ways in terms of the value system, and what's happening in terms of rallying on the ground and how people deal and cope, uh, to what our concepts of American democracy and freedom and what's right to fight for are, than maybe other places in the world. And so it's really disparaging when you hear people kind of manipulate that, and that they're basically talking machines for Russian propaganda and disinformation and media illiteracy, you know.
Do you think there's
So
the
anyway,
misconception that if you're not Russian, you're not subject to Russian propaganda? That like somehow we still have this very old school notion that somehow information is just like within the authoritarian system, and really it's transnational authoritarianism now. Like the propaganda filters into different places. It becomes more insidious, and it also becomes harder to fight. But um, yeah, which is why I'm grateful. I want to make sure I mention this to people like Roman, who joined my class this week. It's a small class at the University of Colorado, joined in the middle of the night to talk to these students because the class is in afternoon time, mountain time. So it's literally 12:30 in the middle of the night. And he joined for over an hour until almost 2 a.m. Kyiv time, to talk to them about a Ukrainian perspective, but also um, about the dangers of Russian propaganda and how that leaks into different places. And I think that's really powerful to have. And I just am enormously grateful. I know that was really moving to the students. One of those students is one of our attendees today. And is here. Um, but yeah, and Jeff has also signed up to join in the middle of the night. He's in Ukraine. And Olga will, if I can in any way, like sort of publicly guilt you into staying up all night, I might. But uh, I mean, this is what's inspiring to me. And like, it's so important. It's so important to keep trying.
I will join it whatever day you propose, Sarah.
Oh, Well, now I've publicly put you on the spot, so you can't say no.
Yeah.
Mila
I
said
just
yes. Mila said yes tacitly too, so
Oh,
she's
did
she's
she?
gonna jump in there.
Oh.
Yeah, she
So
liked your
Mila is
questions. Yes.
Jeff's wife. You can see that this is unusual for me, the overlap of personal and professional. Usually those are very, very separate things for me. But that like so Jeff's wife is probably going to join as well, which is just is amazing. I don't think I can fully ever thank people for doing that. And what that means for students, what that means to me, that people are willing to do that.
Which proves
I
my
just
point about the family, us being a family. So now it's not only figuratively speaking, but actually it's
We can guilt each other into like doing things.
Yeah, right.
yeah,
That's the
it's a
family
gross
dynamic of it.
family. Yeah.
But I mean,
Though,
so at
though I
in a
do,
more serious note, though, it's like I want to promote Ukrainian work and academics and people, and I want to be very conscious of not over asking and putting a greater burden on people who are already under enormous stress and under an enormous burden. Um, because I see this with now who I would call Ukrainian colleagues that aren't here, that are academics, with Ukrainian colleagues that people are worn out. And I can tell, like it's going into year 3 of the war, and people are exhausted, and they're still fighting, and they're resilient, and they're taking care of themselves, and they're doing all the stuff. But I also want to be aware of not over asking in my enthusiasm.
so I think what you're doing is revolutionary
yeah.
in the academic world, and I think other scholars will follow. Just mark my words.
I mean, I hope so. I don't think, it's not going to win me friends in some circles in a sense. It's not especially brave what I'm doing. I don't think but um because there's a lot of support for it in the US, there's a lot of support for it in Ukraine, but there are people who I can tell I mean, I would say maybe it's not are annoyed by it. Like they're ready to be over it, right? Like, do we need to talk this much about like, can't we just go back to what we were doing? And it's like, well, no, things are different now. No, we're not. Things were different before than we thought, right? Like it wasn't, and I'm new to this sort of, I don't want to say bandwagon sounds too glib, but like I, people have been saying that we should be studying Ukraine in its own right for a long time. And the academic community has just not been really listening. So I'm not new for saying that, but I would like to support the efforts. So, and Katya Grisik says thank you for visiting our class, Roman, in the Q&A.
Thank you, thank you. I see there's a comment from Casey agreeing with my points, the literacy about media literacy. Thank you. I have a question. If you don't mind, I'll address the question from Doug Teschner, who was a Peace Corps Ukraine country director 10 years ago now. Doug, thank you for joining. You've always been a great supporter of Ukraine. Thank you for posing your question. I'll just put on my Peace Corps hat for a second and just quickly go over some of the examples that the virtual service pilot participants, which is the beautiful Peace Corps term that Peace Corps loves to come up with, had come up with. We cannot call these individuals volunteers because this program is an unofficial pilot program. It's therefore we've coined a term called VSPP, Virtual Service Pilot Participant, which is actually a private citizen who donates their time to support Ukraine, depending on the sector, whether it's youth development, teaching English as a foreign language, or community economic development. So just very briefly, we have had and still have people, American private citizens, who do leadership courses for students and adults. We have someone in this room who had completed, in addition to the ongoing collaboration with ISAR Ednannia, who completed a beautiful course on change management. Thank you, Jeff. And he did it with a Rotary Club in Ukraine. And it was, in my opinion, it was one of the best courses on change management that I've ever attended. We've had volunteers, sorry, I just did it again. Virtual service pilot participants, including some of the people on this call who've supported the Ukrainian civil society organizations with organizational capacity building seminars and project design and management seminars. Those were high quality, and people still talk about those. We have people who are doing English clubs, simple as that. We have the longest living English club is with a Veteran Hub, which is the English club for either veterans or their families. and that has been going on for over a year now. And then, there was one person doing it at first, then there was no one doing it, and I picked up the facilitation of the English Club, and now we have a great virtual service pilot participants who's doing amazing things with the club. We also have people, including on this call, who've successfully supporting Ukrainian organization when it comes to partnership building. And as an example, as we speak, there's a Ukrainian delegation from the city of Zaporizhia, headed by the acting mayor of Zaporizhia, visiting Washington, D.C., New York City, and then next week they're going to Richmond, Virginia. And that was possible thanks to our virtual service pilot participant, who only signed up for like 3 months gig, and now it's been a year. And yesterday they met with the Deputy Director White from the Peace Corps. They had some congressional office meetings. The meeting with a lot of people who still seem interested in developing sister city relationship with Ukrainian cities. And I can have a separate conversation about those success stories, but I hope that you got a glimpse of what it is that folks already doing, and with something that you can potentially be doing should you have at least up to 5 hours a week to dedicate your time to a Ukrainian organization or an educational establishment to support them in any way possible. So my advice to you would be to monitor Peace Corps, official Peace Corps website for listings in Ukraine, because the number of people who have no experience with Ukraine keeps growing, and the Ukraine RPCV community seems to be busy doing other things, which also means supporting Ukraine.
We have a really good question about what topics we're planning on for the series. And so I'm not going to give names, but I was going to read off for you some of the things that we're hoping to address in the coming Fridays. Join us again, same time, same place, same bat channel for every Friday when we have speakers. But we're hoping to focus on where we are in the third year of the war, getting people from NGOs and local organizations to talk about their day-to-day and their sense of international attention and support right now. We'd like to address veteran rehab, adaptive education, and rebuilding, because that's a really important point, or important issue, given the amount of destruction that's happened in the country and is still happening. Youth civic activism. Jeff and I and Brock Mays, who is here, would really like to talk about a program we're trying to do a pilot of called Civic Embers. That would be a virtual exchange program for civic engagement education between Ukrainian high school students and American high school students, with our idea being that the Americans really need to learn something from the Ukrainians. Not the other way around so much. I mean, I think both can learn from each other, but there's our opinion, but that the Ukrainian students have a lot to offer. And also issues about music, art, culture, literature, historians, the pivoting of civil society organizations. So we've reached out to a number of specific people. The nature of things now truly is people are exhausted. And we will have very good speakers, but I don't want to give names yet, because we're still reaching out, confirming, figuring out dates when it makes sense, and being sensitive to the fact that it's not going to work for some people, and for some people it will. Yeah, I'll stop there. Olga, I think you should take us out, though. We have 2 minutes. The band is being played off the stage.
Okay. I just wanted to mention that Sarah put in the chat the book in English that Ednannia recently published about the stories of Ukrainian fundraising during the war. It has some great insight into what Ukrainian civil society can give to the world, I would say. We're not being humble today, right? So thank you very much to everyone who participated. Thank you so much for numerous wonderful questions that we were eager to answer. And I hope that next Friday we will see each other again, and we will surprise you with some wonderful topics that Sarah just listed. Roman, over to you.
Yeah, apparently Olga and I have some competition as to whose last words our audience will have to hear. No, but I just remembered something, and I want Olga to continue if she wants to, and I'd love to hear from Jeff and Sarah. Because, a lot of times we begin our sessions with the question for every single guest, was like, how do you see Ukraine's victory? And, when I was listening to Sarah just a few minutes ago, when she was talking about her fellow scholars, she said something that kind of like sort of was an emotional trigger for me. She said something like, can we go back to just like the way things were? And I think going back to the question about what it is that Americans still don't understand about Ukraine, and that question, can we go back to how things used to be before? I think the collective West, or the democracies, have to finally understand that this is not some distant, remote, local or regional war. They have to understand that this is their chance. And when I say their, I mean, Western democracies, or Eastern democracies for that matter, but democracies, is their last chance, including the institutions such as UN and NATO, to basically come clean and try to restore the global security order, which sort of means like, can we go back to how things used to be before, but in a different sense, you know? Basically, Ukraine is your last stand. Ukraine is the last stand. And Ukraine is the last thing that separates the rest of the world from a chaos on a much larger scale, like you've never seen before. And therefore, I think the lesson that people in America or elsewhere in the world have to learn is that only Ukraine's victory on Ukrainians' terms, is that last chance. And the sooner we arrive at that goal, the more lives we will save, and basically comes down to the value of a human life. That would be my message.
I wanted to say that I remember back to the very first one of these we held, where we held it. We had an event in person in Kyiv at the ISAR Ednannia office, and Olga was hosting that. And we held it in Washington, D.C. And the Ponar's offices, they have a room where we could set it up, and we had people come in person and we had people on Zoom. And at that time, I didn't give a second thought when I walked into that room that all the posters on the wall were sort of like it's essentially a Russian studies center, not entirely, but with that focus. So it had the books were from Russian authors, the posters on the wall were Russian posters, and we had a young woman that Roman knows attend in person, who's Ukrainian, who was really turned off by the whole thing because the environment was like walking into, I mean, I imagine, I'm paraphrasing, so this is not exactly the language that she used, but like I think now that it must have been like walking into a Russian studies like place, like walking into this very Russian environment to talk about Ukraine. And I didn't give it a second thought when we set up and when we were getting ready for the webinar. And I hope that now I would. I hope that now that would occur to me, what a huge faux pas that is to have this event and to invite people and to have Ukrainians and Americans and people from all over there and to do that. And so I think that's right. And what Roman said about like Ukraine being the sort of last defense, that there's not a going back to kind of like, I think people have trouble accepting that. And for human nature reasons, I guess, but yeah, I'll stop there. Jeff, would you like to play us out? Because we're 4 minutes past the hour and our very loyal audience is here, but.
I agree with everything said wholeheartedly, and I can't amplify it anymore. I think I want to leave the audience with this. But you know what you can do? Something. Just do something. Like it's not. We're not asking. Ukraine isn't asking for people to do something that threatens their own lives or puts them at risk or makes them financially insecure or anything. But we're in a global situation, and it's time that you take a stand with your money, your heart, your time, your energy, just something, you know. And that includes like everything in the world that's going on. We're part of a global community. and what happens here is important. I want my grandkids to kind of have the same freedoms and liberties that I have, and their kids and their kids and their kids. And this is where you need to make a stand for that. So, and then coming the last thing I'll say, tell other people this is, Peter Dickinson, I think Dickerson said on one of her things, he made a point that storytelling is a big component in how people change and shift their hearts and minds. Tell the story from here, tell the story from paper, tell the story in a way that's meaningful to other people so that they can relate it to their own lives and experiences, and then they do something that's, so I can't say how much I just appreciate the people showing up here offline. People are disappearing and they're tired. There are other people showing up, man. When we talk about heroes, they're on the front line and they're still showing up every day. They're suiting up and showing up no matter how they feel. And, that's worth something. It's worth saving. So, thank you.
Thank you, everyone. We'll see you next Friday. Thank you.